Mute. Video. Got it. Hi, Cindy. I don't know. We're probably not. I don't think we're completely up and running.
I'm hearing you.
Oh, good, good. I sent you an email this morning about some volunteer opportunities if you've got people that are the one.
I already forwarded it.
Oh, excellent. That's great. You're way on top of it. So, oh yeah, share screen. Oh, yeah. You know, the last time I did it, I think we have to do it desktop because I think if I do, we can try. Okay, good, good. Yes, except it wants to leave this. Oh, wait, I'm just gonna, yes, that's good. This is always like in the wrong place.
Right.
Wherever I put it, it's in the wrong place. Okay, and I'm gonna go play. So you think we're set except for whatever? Yeah. Okay, good, good, good. All right. Good, good. Somebody told me solar flares. That this last class that there was some solar flares or something going on that was disrupting internet service. So I think we had a legitimate excuse for. Okay. You're the last holdout. Means next class you're gonna have to talk. And we'll make Crystal talk too, and she hates to talk. See, she's saying, no, I'm not gonna talk, but.
Ellie, did you find one?
Yeah, I'm gonna get one from Greg too.
Okay. Where this is the right part. It's in here.
Oh yeah.
And then
So this is the only.
so where does this go?
That will go into the computer.
Okay.
And this is the adapter I have, but it's not what you guys need.
Yeah, that's for VGA.
Yeah. And
Wait,
maybe it could just directly.
This one I think would
It
work
should go.
here.
Yeah, that one goes there. I think this is the one that I don't have a port for.
Okay, I've got one for this, but
Or-
the projector's not working, so we're gonna get you a TV.
Okay.
Um,
All right.
Yeah, we're gonna have to change this. I don't know what's up with this projector.
Yeah, it's, yeah. So good.
don't want it to watch today, it's fine, but consider like. So if you just want to plug it into the laptop, and then we can just have.
Okay.
So if people are listening, we're having technical difficulties with this projector and we'll be up and running in just a minute.
Let's leave it for now. Let's get this TV.
Okay. So how are the bees?
They're doing pretty good so far. I went up yesterday,
Uh-huh.
after I got out of class to go like refill the sugar water. But so far so good. Like we had a problem in the beginning where like I think we used like a broken computer and like they were getting it somehow.
Right.
So we fixed that problem.
Good.
Now there's no bees. They're like dead in there. So
It's very sad. Sometimes the hive top feeders, if
Yeah.
your top doesn't fit real tightly,
yeah.
ants and bees will get in and you'll open it and then you'll have all these floating bees and it's just a
Yeah.
super sad thing to come
So we
across.
fixed that problem so they can't get in anymore. And then I just like refilled those. And then probably next weekend is when we'll do our first like official hive check. But of course also.
I was thinking that Chris, the swarm guy, Chris Richmond, right? You have his contact or?
Yeah, and if I don't, I will.
Yeah, so it'd be nice to have him come talk at one of your classes
Yeah.
about catching swarms, and also he does bee removal from houses.
Oh, wow.
So he gets paid to go in when the bees are like in the walls of the house and to cut the wall out, and he takes a bee back, and it's a really fun process. Like it's a very involved process, but he's a great guy and he'd be a good speaker to have come and do that. And then I was thinking, I can, there's a number of people in the club that do a lot of wax workshop stuff, and maybe in September or something, or when the school year starts, having someone come in and talk to you guys about like melting wax and using candle molds and making, like, we usually make lip balm for everybody, and that's super fun. And then there's state fair, which I'll send you the contact information, but they need volunteers to like work the booth at the state fair, and you get in for free. So you sign up for a 4-hour slot, you get to go to the fair for free. And then you get to like stand at this booth and people come up and ask you questions about bees, and they have a big observation hive. Yeah, so they're always looking for people. David Tarpey, who's our state apiculturist who teaches at NC State, he always makes his students come as part of class, but it's super fun. So that'd be a great thing in the fall to kind of push. And then you guys could also look at the booths, because they're always looking for clubs to put in educational booths, and it's a lot of fun to, like, you know, to have a theme, and it's always county clubs, so it's great to have your club, but maybe not this fall, but the next fall. Yeah. You want me to move that table?
I think it's fine, actually.
All
Thank you,
right.
though. And then this should work with your laptop.
Okay,
Okay,
so around the backside, okay. I'll have it upside down. Okay, is that?
All right, it's on.
Okay,
Sorry about all the
no,
words and
no,
everything.
no, that's fine, it's all, and this one we don't need today,
Okay,
right?
thank
Okay,
you.
thank you so much. All right, guys, let's see if I can move these things out of the way. They're right in the middle of the screen, aren't they? Now they don't. Go again. All right. So we are at the second to the last class. This is really the last kind of content class. After this, we're gonna be kind of reviewing. And we're gonna look at seasonal beekeeping. So we're gonna take everything we've learned about bee anatomy, sociology, about kind of the life cycle of the honeybees and the life cycle of the hive, and all the knowledge that we picked up about what beekeepers do in relationship to that. And we're going to kind of look at it as throughout the year and kind of cement that knowledge into kind of looking at it, what you would, how you would approach the hive each season. So we're going to start in winter. And so this is what's going on in winter. The red maple is blooming, and that's the first influx of nectar and pollen. So that starts off the bee year. That's when the bees are starting to come out of being in cluster. The queen begins to lay eggs. She may have been laying a little bit of eggs now and then over the winter, but mostly she's not laying any eggs in the winter time, especially if you're further north than us. So she's really starts back as soon as they start bringing in the pollen from the red maple. So as a beekeeper, this is like the beginning of our new year. The workers start foraging any day when the temperatures are above 50 degrees. The workers will be out bringing in pollen and nectar. And once the red maple blooms, we begin to see that succession of blooms that we talked about in our plant class. So once those things happen, Is it gone? Okay. Okay, good, good. All right. So what happens is when the bees are in cluster, all they're doing is using their energy to keep each other warm, right? We talked about them forming a ball, unclipping their wings, and vibrating to keep the other bees warm and moving in and out, and that ball just stays warm. It kind of is clustered around, hopefully, where the honey stores are. So they're eating as they're staying warm, but they're not using a lot of energy. As soon as they start foraging again and the queen starts laying and there's brood to be taken care of and larvae to be taken care of, they're using more energy. So at that point, whatever they have stored starts dropping quickly. So those are just things to be aware of. Here's our beautiful honeybee on red maple flowers. So the dangers of winter, and especially with our erratic winters that we're having more and more often, is bad weather. So really any major changes in weather, like it would be better if we had a winter where the temperature dropped into the 40s and stayed in the 40s for 2 months and then started warming up. But what we have is we have an 80-degree day, and then we have a 50-degree day, and then we have a 30-degree day. And then we have days where the temperature warms up, but then we have steady rain. So all of that disrupts the bees' ability to forage. So once they break brood and they're using more energy, they also need to be able to get out and forage and collect nectar and pollen to feed themselves. So what most often happens is in that critical time, somewhere in like February and March, the stores that they put in the fall run out. And if they can't get out to forage or something, or there's a major freeze and all the cherry blossoms drop off and don't produce nectar, then you're going to have a shortage and you're going to have starvation. And what happens is you'll pull out your comb, you'll go in your hive, you'll pull out the frames, you'll be like, something's wrong, the bees aren't coming and going. And you'll find all the little bees with their heads down in the cells and their little butts sticking out, and they will have starved to death. And it's a horrible event, like something you would like to avoid. So being prepared in the fall, will help you prevent this problem in the wintertime, but also checking the hives for weight, making sure that you've got good stores, and feeding when you can feed. So the opportunities that are great is that you can have a really nice early buildup of brood and larvae, which means you're going to have more foragers ready when the honey flow comes. So things that we need to do in the wintertime. We need to check on the stores by lifting the hives. We need to avoid going in the hives as much as possible, although often when we have those weird 80-degree days, or say you have 3 days in a row that are in the 60s, you could go in and check your hives, but you're going to disrupt the bees. So you only want to do it if you really need to. Making sure the bees have food. This is a time when there's no brood on the hive. You could treat the bees with oxalic. So oxalic acid is like a fumigant that you put in the hives. It only affects the phoretic mites. So it only affects the mites that are on the bees, the grown bees. It won't kill any bees that are any mites that are in the cells on larval bees. It'll only kill the phoretic mites. So, but it will drop your population down before the spring, and it won't have any long-term effects on like your honey. So it's a good time if you're worried. If you went into fall and you treated in the fall, and then you rechecked your mite load and your mite load was still heavy going into winter, doing an oxalic treatment in the winter time before they really start breaking brood would be an effective way to drop your mite load before the spring starts. So Then we're going into spring, kind of have summer rolling into that, because all of this, you know, we say spring, but there's no like definitive moment where we suddenly say, oh, the weather has changed. We've gone from being in conditions, winter conditions. Sometimes mid-February, we're looking at spring behavior in the hive. And sometimes it's like April, we're really looking at spring behavior in the hive. So everything's blooming. And here we have like the Prunus mume, which is one of the first of the Prunus family to bloom early on. So the nectar sources begin in earnest. If there's not like bad freezes, if there's not like drenching rainfall for days on end, you're going to have good nectar coming into your hive. And that kind of is the difference between winter and spring in the eye of the beekeeper, is the supply of nectar and pollen is pretty much continuous. So the queen is really laying probably up to 2,000 eggs every day. The foragers are out bringing back supplies. All the bees in the hive are working. As they're hatching, they're becoming nurse bees. They're taking care of the brood. They're like bringing in stores. They're, you know, when they get a little older, they're starting to forage. And that's what we want, is we want lots of forage and we want lots of population building up. Now, there's a moment where the queen begins relaying drones. She doesn't need to lay drones in the wintertime because they're not going to be any queens breeding. So one of the things to kind of mark that time in your thinking is when you start seeing drones in the hive, or you start seeing capped drone cells. Because that means if for some reason you lose a queen, or you split a hive, or you have a swarm, there are going to be drones to mate with your virgin queens. So it's a good marker of what's going on. The weather can still be erratic, as we're witnessing today. So just being conscious of that and keeping an eye on the stores is important. So the dangers that happen: late frosts not only can kill off nectar sources, but you can also have chilled brood. If the queen has laid way out into the edges of the hive and the brood is not big enough to keep the larva warm, those bees will freeze. It's not going to kill your hive, but it's going to slow down the amount. And there's nothing you can really do about that. Starvation is still an issue. And then at the total opposite end of the spectrum, if everything's been going really, really good, you're going to start seeing swarming. And I think I said last time possibly that I had a little mini swarm at my house, like an attempted swarm, but they basically, sometimes they'll do like a trial. The queen won't really want to fly and they'll just go back. So I had like, when they finally landed and settled, I had like 30 bees on my Lady Banksia rose. And there was no reason to even do anything with them. So opportunities. So sometimes early spring, if things are going great, you might have an early honey surplus. This is pretty rare, but it's really nice. Maybe you might just take a few frames out just to get some varietal honey. You might get some like early kind of fruity honey that would be really good. And the best opportunity is you're going to get a buildup of your population so you're ready for the actual honey flow. So things to do: you got to monitor your population growth. I am totally not doing this. I have yet to put any boxes on my hive, even though I know it's overflowing right now. So you need to add space as needed. As they start filling up the frames and the hive is really full, you need to add boxes on top, mostly maybe medium supers, depending on what your plan is of how you're going to manage your boxes. If you're somebody that flops boxes, so you take your lower box and put it on top, this would be the time you do that. You want to, if you haven't monitored your Varroa yet, this is a good time to do a sugar shake. because you may have time to treat your bees before you're ready for the honey flow, right? You don't want to be putting any kind of chemical treatment on your bees during the honey flow. So, and if your hive is really big, very robust, this would be the time you would divide a large hive. So I think we briefly touched on this, and I'm going to just say a little bit more about dividing a hive. Basically, any frame of brood or honey or pollen, if it doesn't have any bees in it, it can be moved to another hive. You can pull it out, shake the bees off, and just stick it in another hive. And you can balance. You have a weak hive and a strong hive. You can balance a hive that way. So you can combine hives by putting newspaper between them so that the bees get used to the scent of the new queen, kind of like two cats meeting under a doorway. By the time they chew through the newspaper, the hive will combine back to one. So now is the time that you can divide a large hive. So you went through winter, you've got 2 deep boxes full of bees. You've got a super that's already full of like nectar that they're curing. This would be a great time to split that hive. And you can do what's called a walkaway split or a blind split, which means you're not going to locate the queen, but you're going to divide up the stores and the bees equally. So one hive, one box will have the queen in it. The other box if you find the queen, then you know, but the other box will have lots of fresh eggs, lots of workers, lots of nurse bees, lots of brood, and lots of honey stores. And so the hive that has the queen will just keep rolling along. It'll just be short on workers. But the other hive will have eggs to make a new queen. So the queenless hive, you'll just have to keep an eye on and keep checking both and make sure that after, say, 5 weeks to 6 weeks that you have a queen laying. Because that queen, right? How many days does it take a queen to emerge? 16. Perfect. So shorter than the others, right? So you've got 16 days. So the bees have eggs from 1 to 3 days old to put into an emergency queen supersedure cell. It's going to take 16 days for her to emerge, 2 or 3 days for her to get her footing, a couple of days to go fly on mating flights. And this can only happen, right, if you have drones, right? You have to have drones because they've got to go on a mating flight and get mated with somebody. So she's got to fly on that mating flight. She's got to come back the first day or 2 after she's finished mating. She's learning how to lay eggs. So she's not going to be laying very well, but a few days after that, she'll start laying. So you can kind of say, I did the split on this day. I should be seeing eggs. You calculate those numbers out. I should be seeing eggs by this day. And if you're not seeing eggs, you need to go get a queen. And Baileys will usually have queens. It's a good idea to say, I'm about to do a blind split. Are you going to have queens available on X date in case my queen fails? Because she could fly out of the hive and a Baltimore Oriole could be migrating through, snap her up, and then you're queenless. So, but it's a great time. Like, the earlier you do that, the better off your hives are going to be, because you need to split them on the early side. Like, I always think about splitting them in the summer. And by the time you hit the summer, it's not a good time because they need to have that massive amount of nectar and pollen coming in to build up so that they're built up enough to go through the fall. So we head into summer. This is the lovely Cleome, which is also called Rocky Mountain bee plants. So it's native more to the Midwest, and we have it around here as an ornamental, but the bees love it. So after the tulip poplar flow ends, your nectar sources are going to quickly drop off. And So the hive, which is built up and built up and built up during all that inflow of nectar and pollen. So those things are in direct correlation. Like the queen is aware of how much nectar and pollen is coming in. The hive is producing pheromones with bringing in all that material, and that ramps the queen up to her maximum production of eggs. So by the time you get to the end of the tulip poplar flow, your hive should be kind of maxed out. It's like it's as, you know, it's operating at full tilt. But then as soon as we hit that late May, early June week where everything turns dry, the temperatures shoot up into the 90s, it's all going to drop back down. So this is a time when swarms are really likely. It's also a time if you have a hive that, say, has a high Varroa mite population and hasn't been doing very well in the spring, and it's kind of weak, this is a time when a strong hive is going to be like, hey, they're right next door. I don't have to fly half a mile to a flower. I can just go rob this other hive. So it's a good time to kind of equalize your hives, make sure that if you have a weak hive or a hive that you're like babying along and you're like a little worried about, that maybe you put an entrance reducer on the door, because this robbing can happen in an hour. I've gone to hives before to take honey off of them and come in and there's nothing. You know, like 1 minute you have a kind of a weak hive that has some good stores, and an hour later, you know, there's been all this activity at the front door, and then you come in and everything's gone. And you can tell that you've been robbed because the bees go in kind of ferociously after that honey, and there'll be little flecks of wax all over where they've chewed through all the wax cappings and taken the honey and gone. And they're going to fight in the doorway. Sometimes you'll see minor fights in the doorway, which is normal. But if you see bees kind of overwhelming the entrance of the hive, it's usually one hive attacking another hive. So just being aware that the hives are going to kind of the stress level on the hives is going to increase. And the hotter it is, the drier it is, the hungrier they are, all of that's going to increase the stress on the bees. And the bees that you went into in your tank top and shorts are suddenly, you know, going to not be so friendly. So, you know, you might not use a veil hardly at all, and you're totally comfortable doing that. But then you go into a hive in the heat of the summer, and you're gonna usually find some cranky bees. So dangers that we're looking at is still swarming. And the later you catch a swarm, the less chance you have of overwintering that swarm. The Varroa mite population, we looked at that chart that showed, you know, the Varroa mite population is going up kind of in accordance with the honeybee population. When the honeybee population begins to drop off in the summer, the Varroa mite population continues to expand. So your percentage of staying under 10% mite load in your hive is suddenly going to shift, right? So, and then dearth. So this is the time, you know, maybe not in June, but as you get into July and August, depending on what's going on with the weather, this is a time that your bees can starve to death really easily. So it's a time that you really kind of once a week, you want to be lifting the hive. Even if you're not going in the hives, you want to be lifting the hives and making sure you don't need to be putting sugar water on those hives. Okay, so let's see if this will work. There we go. See if I can make it larger. Going to let me, I don't think. So this is from Walter. This is on YouTube. And this is the bees leaving the hive to swarm. Like a mass exodus.
So the good thing about seeing this is this means you're seeing them leave, so that means you can follow them to where they're gonna land. So that's a really good thing. All right, let's see if we can go back. They're still gonna leave. I mean, they're not gonna leave that day. The same thing with robbing. Like once robbing's about to happen, there's very little you can do. People can say you can like put a wet sheet over the hive just to calm down. Like if the robbing bees are super pumped to rob, you might be able to like throw this wet sheet over the top and give
You're muted, Geneva.
unmute.
Yes.
Yes, yes. All right. I'm unmuted and share screen. Are we back on, everybody?
I can hear you, but not see your screen.
Okay. All right. Are we back?
Yes.
Yeah, good, good, good. Okay. So when the bees fly out, you usually don't see them leaving the hive like that. Walter's very observant. But once you see them flying or you hear them flying out in your yard, you can follow them to the bivouac spot. And they're going to cluster around the queen. Like the queen's going to land on a branch. All the other bees are going to ball up around her. And then you can come and shake the bees into whatever you have handy. In this case, I have a box. In that picture, I had a box in a wheelbarrow with some of the frames taken out. So I'm going to show you a little video, hopefully, that's going to run. It's not wanting to run. And then step back very fast. Beautiful, beautiful. It's almost impossible. So that was Alan Jones, who's the professor of ethnobotany, and that was in the bushes around the bell tower. There was a swarm. We got a call about it. We went out. All I had was my weeding bucket. We put my weeding bucket under there. He shook the branch really hard. Most of the bees fell down in. Only bee that counts is the queen. If the queen falls in, eventually all the bees will cluster back around her in wherever she's ended up. So if you get her to drop into the basket, then you get everybody else. And then because we didn't have any other tools with us, we just kind of stuck a plastic bag over the top. He took those bees home, shook them into a hive, and had a new hive. So ideally, that would be your reaction to swarming. And so swarming, once it starts, it's kind of best at that point to let it go and do your best at collecting the bees that swarmed. And oftentimes, if you have a long-term bee yard, the bees are going to kind of smell where swarms have been in the past, and oftentimes they'll land in the same area, which is nice. Some bees like to go up, and pretty much if they go up there, I mean, I have climbed 40-foot ladders to try to shake bees out of trees. It is not something you really like. Sometimes you just gotta let them go.
because there's no great advantage. So just gonna back up. So swarms and then opportunities. So usually in June is when I like to harvest my honey. This is my dog Orion on this honey jar and some of my honey from my hives. And we talked a lot about harvesting honey. So if you're a member of the Orange County Beekeepers Association, you can rent an extractor. I think it's $3 to $5 a day. And I think you can rent it for 1 to 3 days at a time. You have to go pick it up, but they have a storage shed not far from campus. So you just have to coordinate picking it up. And honey harvest is a lot of fun. It's more fun if you have lots of hands. You need to make a decision about how much honey you're going to keep and how much honey you're going to leave for the bees. I think Walter kind of addressed that earlier. Obviously, you're going to have the summer and the fall to build up stores before the winter. And as he said, it's cheaper to feed bees sugar water than to feed them honey. But everybody kind of has to make their own decision about that. So your to-do list: harvest honey if you have honey to harvest. Continue to monitor for Varroa mites. If you don't have a water source nearby where your hives are, you kind of need to be aware of where they're flying to get water. And this becomes a problem more in the summertime. That's when we see an issue with it. And bees like water that has a smell to it. So I had a place that I watered my bees, and it started out as just a barrel with a bunch of water plants that I brought home. And it was just this stinky thing. I couldn't filter the water. I couldn't do anything about it. It just sat there and smelled. But it was pretty. It had water plants in it, and the bees loved it. I went in and I put a nice water feature with a little bit of moving water and filtration. And the bees were like, we don't like this at all. It doesn't smell good like your barrel of water. So they like smellier water. And one of the smells that they like is chlorine. So if you live somewhere and your next door neighbors have a swimming pool and your bees don't have a source of water that they like, what they're going to do is they're going to fly to your neighbor's swimming pool in the summertime and drink water out of the swimming pool. And nothing will make your neighbors hate you more than bees drinking water out of their swimming pool. So if you don't have a good source for your bees nearby, that's something in the summer that can become a problem, because they're going to be collecting water. Do you guys remember what the uses of water is for the honeybee? So they need water just like we need water, but they also use water to put on the tops of the frames to cool the hive. So the amount of water they're bringing in the summertime while they're trying to keep the hive cool is going to be greater than any other time of the year. So you want to make sure, because you're worried about the dearth and the lack of nectar supply, that you're monitoring the stores and you're feeding your bees when you need to. And early in the summer, like maybe up to June, you could be catching swarms. As the summer goes on and you get closer to the winter, the chances of you getting that swarm through the winter are going to drop, right? If you catch a swarm in May, there's some old rhyme about this, it's worth a lot. But if you catch a swarm in July, it's nothing. It's just going to be work for you, because your chances of having a swarm survive in July are way lower, because they have to build up stores, they have to get a new queen, they have to create enough population. So sometimes late in the season, a swarm isn't going to do you very much good. You can sugar shake, or not sugar shake, you can do a newspaper combine with a swarm. So you catch a small swarm late in the season. you could put a box on top of an existing hive, pinch your queen, and dump those bees into the box. So you're basically combining them back in with a weaker hive. Because basically all you've got is whatever honey they have in their honey crops, an old aging queen, and a whole lot of foragers. So you don't really, so for them to build back up in the spring is easy, but for them to build back up in the summer when you're during a dearth is very hard. Okay, so we're heading into fall and kind of the late summer, fall season. And what we're looking at is you're going to start seeing the goldenrod and the aster bloom and maybe the Bidens, those, and a lot of those kind of sunflowery late summer, early fall flowers. The bees are going to slowly pick up in their forage again and their brood production. Nothing like in the spring, but they're going to have an uptick. Now, some falls, once again, we're looking at the weather. We can sometimes have dry falls in North Carolina. If the dryness hits after the frost, it's not a problem. But if you have like a dry September, which I think 2 years ago, we had like 6 weeks of no rain kind of in September and October. It was a terrible time. And it was really tough on the bees because at that point, they needed to be collecting nectar to get through the winter. And you had a bunch of mature plants that were blooming, but they weren't producing any nectar because the ground was so dry. So there's a direct correlation between rainfall and flower production. Now in a tree, it's kind of the rainfall over the whole year, right? Because it's got bigger stores and it's on a longer time cycle. But with a perennial, it's like, the weeks leading up to its bloom. And with some annuals, it's like the day of is going to affect the nectar production. So a dry fall can be a problem. So this is the time you should be feeding for sure. You should be making sure, let's see, we're going to talk about all of that. You're going to be, really checking your stores. And late summer, early fall is the best time to treat for Varroa mites, especially the fumigants, the thymol, and the Mite away. So those things have to be put in. There has to be, you put them in for like a 2-week period, and the temperatures have to be in a specific range. So it can't be like on a 90-degree day. So you can't do it in really in the heat of summer, but it's also got to be warm enough for the fumigant to release. So you can't do it once it turns cold. So you have this window kind of in September when you can treat. So monitoring for Varroa mites, watching the weather, if you're treating, coming up with a plan for how you're going to treat. You're checking your population stores, and you're hopefully doing everything you can to prevent late swarms, because the late swarms aren't going to help the bees and it's not going to help you. So mite treatments we just talked about. Your opportunities are helping the bees get the strongest population they can for the winter, which includes lots and lots of honey stores and really healthy bees. So we go right back up to the correlation between Varroa mites and loss of ability, right? Yeah, a hive that's weakened because of Varroa mite depredation, where you have bees with shorter lifespans, you have bees with less intelligence, less ability to learn and to find their way back to the hive. That's going to reduce your stores, and that's going to reduce your population, and it's going to reduce the health of the nurse bees that are fed by the bees that are weakened by the Varroa mites. So making it through the winter is going to be critical to making sure your mite population is under control in the fall. Does that make sense? That's kind of like when people lose hives over the winter time, the state inspectors say almost every single time it's because they didn't treat their Varroa mites going into the fall. So it's a great time to be doing outreach. This is my friend Bill. He's doing wax workshop in Roxborough with a bunch of kids. It's a great time because things are slowing down in terms of what you can do as a beekeeper. So it's a great time to be making candles for Christmas or for sale. It's a great time to be a part of the state fair. The state fair has a huge honeybee section, and the state inspectors do a lot of work. They have tons of booths that the county clubs put up. They have a table where people volunteer to talk about bees. I think I said this early on before we got everybody on board, but it's a great opportunity to volunteer. You can do it through the extension agency, through Don Hopkins, who's our local, he's our head of our state inspectors, but he's also our local state inspector. And you get a free pass to go to the fair. You work at the booth for 4 hours, talk about honeybees, watch bees, hang out with other beekeepers. So the fall is a great time, not only preparing for the winter for your bees, but also for kind of talking about bees and reaching out and kind of thinking about the next year. So monitor and treat for Varroa early. We talked about how important that is. If the fall flow isn't strong, being sure you're feeding your bees extra. So if your hives are weak going into the fall, they didn't have a good strong summer, this is a great time to combine hives. And what people will say is you're taking your losses in the fall. If you have 2 weak hives and you don't think either one of them are going to make it through the winter, sometimes you can combine those with a newspaper combine. And then in the spring, you're going to have one really, really strong hive. And early in spring, you can split them back out. You still have 2 hives, but you've given them extra resources to make it through the winter. Lots of people use sugar boards to feed in the wintertime. That's like, it's also called a candy board. So it's sugar that's been made into like just a hard sheet of candy. And you put that in the top of the hive, and it doesn't matter if it freezes, the bees can go up and eat that sugar as kind of an instant source of energy. And then there's something called a quilt box, which is a box that sits on top of your hive. It's filled with usually cedar shavings, and it soaks up the moisture in the hive. So it keeps the hive drier. So that allows the bees to keep the hive warmer. And I will say, not this year, but last year, I put a candy board and a quilt box on one of my hives and not on the other one. The one that I did that for came through the winter so much stronger than the one I didn't. So it's not a bad investment to help your bees. So, as Walter says, you never can tell with bees. And that's kind of the takeaway of the whole thing about learning about beekeeping. Like, I've told you some facts about bees. I've told you a lot of my opinions about bees, but every beehive is slightly different and every beekeeper is different. And every time you have to make a choice, there's not always a clear answer. You know, I can say, well, it looks a little weak, I might combine it. And someone else, another beekeeper will tell you something else, and a third beekeeper will tell you something else. So in every circumstance, there's an artistry to beekeeping. There's a lot of facts, and I recommend learning as much as you can, continuing to like study bees, because that'll inform your choices. But there's also like an artistic quality, a creative quality about managing your bees. And a lot of that comes from your personal interaction with your hives. And so that's the place where, as a beekeeper, that's going to be your edge, is like finding out where you are, where you land on various different things. There are some beekeepers who never use any kind of Varroa treatment. There are some beekeepers who treat religiously. There are some beekeepers who harvest as much honey as they can. There are some beekeepers who don't harvest honey at all. So there's millions of choices in how you manage your bees, and that depends on what you want to do with the bees and also who you are as a beekeeper. So whatever you learn, temper that with your own personal knowledge and your own personal experience of the bees. And next, let's see. So next Thursday is our last class, and we're going to take the certified beekeeper test together as a group. And I think anyone who wants to pursue the Master Beekeeper program through the NC State Beekeepers Association, I think right now you can just sign up and take the test online. It used to be you had to get someone to proctor it for you, but I think the way they have it set up is that you can take that online. And the Master Beekeeper program is just it's a great program. It really reaches out to all the beekeepers at all different levels and gives them the opportunity to become better beekeepers and also to become stewards for beekeeping. Part of it is experience in the field. If you become a certified beekeeper, you take the written test, which is pretty simple and all of you should pass. And then a year from now, you would take a field test where you would go through a hive with a beekeeper and be able to identify the things we've talked about: the queen, the brood, the eggs, drone cells, honey stores, pollen stores. You need to be able to answer a few questions in the hive about how to take care of the hive. And then you would become a certified beekeeper. And then in like 2 years or 3 years, then you could go to try to be a journeyman beekeeper. And each level involves outreach and community service, which is a big part of the State Beekeepers Association, teaching, volunteering, talking to people about beekeeping, and also continued learning. And the tests get harder and harder. The highest level is a master craftsman beekeeper. And to reach that level, you have to create a research project with honeybees. And that's in your specific field of study around honeybees. So it's a great program. I'm topped out at Master Beekeeper, and maybe someday I'll have time to like keep going on that journey. But we're going to talk some more about the State Association next time, because it's a great resource, great opportunities. They have 2 state meetings a year where scientists from around the world and around the country come and present their research on honeybees. It's a great time to network with other beekeepers and learn new skills. Always a lot of fun. So, any questions about the kind of the year in beekeeping? Yes. I think that's for a homeowner, that's a reasonable thing. If you have, water anywhere near your property. So I see bees drinking at Battle Grove. So probably that's a place your bees will go to. They like Battle Grove because the water kind of runs over the rocks and there's moss and stuff that they can just kind of go to the edge to collect water. But as a homeowner, if you have like a little creek, or you even have like kind of like just a deep muddy spot, or if you have a water feature, if you're a big gardener and you want to install a water feature, this is a really good excuse to put in one. So, anybody else? Cindy, are you?
Yeah, does it make sense perhaps to water the hive when it's been hot and dry? Instead of having the
Um,
bees go get water and try to wet
No,
themselves?
you want to keep the hive dry. You just want them to have a source. And if you didn't really, like, if you just wanted to create a source for the summer, you could even put out like a kid's swimming pool and put just a little bit of water in it with some leaves or sticks floating in it. But most of the time, this is a problem if you live in like kind of a subdivision or a neighborhood that's, you know, where everything's drained really well and there's no water, you know, just sitting nearby. So it's another thing, like when you're familiarizing yourself with the plants that are growing around your property, just looking around to see what's there. But they don't need very much water. I see them like if I leave a bucket out and it gets a little water in the bottom of it, they'll come to that. So it doesn't have to be anything extravagant. It could just be a bird bath that you made sure had water in it and also had something for them to stand on so they don't drown while they're drinking. Anything else, Adrienne? How are we? Are we good? All right, so next Thursday, we'll take the quiz together and we'll kind of review. So bring all of your questions, whatever you need to know before this class is over. And thanks everybody for being here and Bee Club meeting coming up next weekend. So look for an email announcement. Excellent. All
Does
right,
the
thank you.
test apply for those of us who have been attending online as well?
Well, so I'm giving you a practical test and I'm also giving you the link to where you can take it online. Does that make sense? We're going to run through it as a group and just talk our way through the test, but then you can just go to the NCSBA website and they have a link to an online testing and you can just do it that way. And it's easy. You're going to do great. It's not a very hard test. All right. Thank you guys. I'll see you next week. All good.